Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and in some cases, late good night for this session. I see that Smita is in the East Coast of North America at 1 a.m. And I think she may have the record for the earliest in the day. But let's get started. We have lots to talk about. It's an exciting topic that we have curated for this conversation. Now, in terms of the topic itself, I just want to add a couple of thoughts before we get started. The first is that this session, which is about curating a knowledge network for urban resilience, invites a host of people from different backgrounds to come and speak. And we are meeting today at a time of great change and fracturing around the globe. And even as the planet is engulfed by COVID, that is continuing to drive societies to greater isolation, we continue to recognize the shaky foundations upon which global prosperity gains of the recent past have been made. And despite progress in many places, deep-rooted and increasingly widening social, environmental, and economic divides and disparities characterize our world. And indeed, we live in a time of astounding inequalities, from poverty, lack of access to education, the disproportionate impact of climate change, and vulnerable to racial injustice and gender inequality. The challenges we face together are innumerable. And couched against the backdrop of the need for adaptation, this session engages with ways in which collaborative models of knowledge production can be designed. And at the University of British Columbia, where I work, the way we think about bringing together multiple stakeholders is this 5 C's model. Colleges and universities, that's the first C. Community organizations, corporates, cities, and countries. And when you think about all of these different stakeholders coming together, it's not easy. And indeed, that is hopefully the conversation that we will start engaging in today. And so today, in the first bit of this conversation, we have Professor Saleemul Huq, who's the director of ICCCAD, and Rajesh Tandon, the founder president of PRIA and the UNESCO co-chair in community-based research and social responsibility in higher education, are here. And so what I'm going to invite them to do very quickly is to share some thoughts specifically around what are the types of knowledge models relevant for adaptation, who should be the key stakeholders, and what should be the structure? How do we do this together? So 3 questions, pick any one, all, and maybe take 2 or 3 minutes to shape some of your thoughts. And I'll first start with Dr. Saleem. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor Murali, and good afternoon from Dhaka, Bangladesh. And thank you for organizing this session and this very interesting topic and inviting me to be a panelist. So in my center, the International Center for Climate Change and Development, we focus on climate change related, adaptation related research, primarily on what we call locally led adaptation, working with the most vulnerable communities in the country, both in the urban settings as well as in the rural settings, and not just in Bangladesh, where we are located, but also in the South Asia region with partner universities in South Asia, and even broader in the least developed countries, where we are part of a network of universities in the least developed countries in Asia and Africa, called the LDC, or Least Developed Countries Universities Consortium on Climate Change, or LUCCC or luck. And one of the fundamental principles that we all try to adopt in doing our research on climate change adaptation is to focus on engaging with and then bringing in the vulnerable community voices themselves. They could be grassroots level civil society organizations, women's groups, youth groups, local NGOs, maybe international NGOs with local partners, a variety of ways in which they may exist and be organized. Slum Dwellers International, obviously one big group that have partners in the slums in many cities. But our location is in the university. So we are in a university, we are teachers, we teach, we are researchers, we do research, and we have students. So we have young people, youth. So it is all three of these sort of headings or variety of ways in which we want to engage. We want to learn about this process so that it can be part of our teaching. We want to do research on this, particularly action research with the communities. And then we want our students to get involved in this as well, whether they be postgraduate research students or undergraduate students who are doing some field work or working on the field with vulnerable communities. So we see this as integral to our role as academics and researchers to do the kind of research that we feel will be meaningful and useful rather than simply research for research sake and publications that only a few academics will read. We had an interesting comment from in the opening session from one of our keynote speakers, the Mr. Sabir Hussain Chaudhary, who is a member of parliament and chairs the Bangladesh Parliamentary Committee on Environment. And he said he read somewhere that the typical academic paper does not get more than 10 readers. So he says, well, the academic papers alone are not going to reach the intended audiences. I'm not sure of his statistics, but he's probably right. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Professor Saleem. Let me invite Rajesh.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Murali, for this organizing this conversation. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. This is a very interesting theme that you have picked up. My experience now for the last 40 years is in a setting which is not a university setting. It's a research and training nonprofit. And we focus on community-based research as a methodology of articulating the knowledge of the communities so that they develop a sense of self-respect and dignity about what they know, and then enable them to access new knowledge that may be more macro or universal, which may come from academic knowledge workers. So in our view, the experience we have had in the last 4 or 5 years, particularly, we are creating a global consortium we call Knowledge for Change. And in that consortium, there is partnership between a civil society organization or a community organization, in some cases even local government, with a research or academic institution. And jointly, they identify issues or research questions. And then community researchers participate along with the students and faculty of the academic institution. We now have 20 such hubs around the world. And on our UNESCO chair website, you will find more details. Our experience, even with these well-meaning hubs, and these are well-meaning professionals, these are people both in civil society and in academia who are thoughtful, sensitive, and many of them are looking at issues of adaptation and resilience in the way that Professor Huq just described. But there are some very practical challenges. And 3 days ago, I was speaking at a UNESCO webinar on indigenous knowledge and open science. As you are aware, UNESCO is making a recommendation on open science, which all member states are expected to adopt sometime in November this year. And what I heard there was very interesting. I heard that indigenous knowledge keepers, indigenous communities are at the forefront of action on climate, as you know. Their knowledge system has been very valuable when it comes to land, forest, water, oceans. And that knowledge system actually has been either interpreted and theorized by the dominant European knowledge system or devalued. So they were raising a very important question, which resonates with my own experience, that we must come to terms with, in this kind of a network, the difficulty in trying to assume that there is equality, that we can promote equality of conversation around knowledge in urban centers. Last 5-6 years, we have been working with urban poor in several cities. And one of the first things we had to do was to find a way to articulate their own knowledge with municipalities. And municipalities in each of these cases immediately hired a consultant who can write in English language, in concise, what these urban poor were saying. Now, we must acknowledge, therefore, that there is deep inequality and even hostility, if not apathy, but hostility, between the knowledge systems and their knowledge keepers. If we talk about community knowledge, we have to be sensitive to local language. Community knowledge is not expressed in English or French or Spanish. We have to be also sensitive to the inequalities of power and resources that are controlled between the communities and the academia. And even in our knowledge for change hubs, as I was saying, we are finding these practical challenges coming forward. Community organizers, civil society folks are producing, using knowledge for survival and their well-being. They are not converting that knowledge in academic articles or stories or case studies. That task is done by students or researchers, or even by a professional team that Priya has. But many a times, in capturing their experience or stories, we tend to use our own epistemological and theoretical frameworks, which tend to do injustice to that knowledge system. So one has to be very careful when we want to bring them together, though there is no option but to work together. All I am highlighting from my experience in the last 5-6 years in particular is ways in which we should be sensitive. That despite the access to communication technology, most of the urban poor still use oral communication. They use their smartphones, if they have one, for speaking and talking, not so much for reading and writing. So where is the place for oral forms of sharing knowledge? How does that become a part of this collaborative platform? And how do we invest resources in the community organizations to be able to do the kind of systematization of their knowledge, which in the partnership will be very valuable. Otherwise, what happens is that the students and researchers go to communities, listen to their stories, record them, video them, and then systematization is done back inside the university system. I think there is a critical need for joint systematization, and that will only happen when we find resources to be investing in such collaborative partnership, resources in the hands of civil society and community organizations. I do believe, though, as Murali began by saying, that there is an urgent need to create and strengthen this network. And the way to do it would be to find nodes around the world, and those nodes should in themselves be potential partnership nodes, so that we bring together various systems of knowledge. Now, I like the idea of 5C, but only 4 of those 5 Cs are in one system of language, knowledge, and power. It's only the communities. So we cannot equate and say all 5 Cs have equal voice or equal. 4 are together. They speak the same language, they value the same knowledge system, and the communities are. So one has to be sensitive to this. Otherwise, we will very soon lose them. And if the communities don't see value of their knowledge for themselves, then they will very soon drop out of this kind of a network. So thank you very much for kicking this off, Murali.
Excellent. Thank you for those comments, Saleem and Rajesh. Sardar, if you don't mind stopping sharing your screen, I think if we have any slides, we can those. But yeah, this is perhaps a view that people can see everybody's face a little bit bigger. So thank you. So, in your comments, there are many important themes that surface here, that despite intentions to collaborate, despite the fact that, one of the most important sustainable development goals to get things done is the partnerships for impact, SDG 17, forming equitable partnerships so that all voices can be heard, that asymmetries in incentives, asymmetries in power, asymmetries in knowledge, asymmetries in resources, those are addressed. Those are very, very challenging to address without a lot of conversation, without respect, and without everybody checking in their ego at the door. It's not an easy task that is contemplated here. So let's move. We'll come back to that conversation when Smita brings together some of the lessons learned from this little experiment that we've been running. And for the last 5 years, as part of CURE, which is the Collaborative for Urban Resilience and Effectiveness that we've launched with many universities around the world, we've been working on resilience challenges that have been articulated by chief resilience officers of cities that belong initially to the 100 Resilient Cities Network. And we've had students, we offer these projects as part of a pedagogical program on urban resilience. And the students work on these projects, and we've learned a little bit, but now we have learned enough to pivot from some of that learning to say, part of how universities have engaged with these projects is on the basis of their academic calendar. But the world doesn't operate on the basis of academic calendars of universities. When the semester is over in December, the challenges of adaptation and resilience continue in our communities. And so this past fall, CURE partnered with WRI, with ICCCAD, with SDI, with LUC, with the Resilient Cities Network to curate resilience challenges that our students could engage with. They finished that work in December, and now we'll offer the same course again starting in January, and the new set of students will pick up on that that work so that there's a continuing focus on these challenges. And so what we'll turn now attention to is just some of the learnings from that. What were the challenges that the students engaged with? And I can talk a little bit about what the learnings from the students were. We'll talk about the need for integration of multiple disciplines and opportunities and challenges, and then the next steps as well. So one of the first projects that we engaged with, there were 9 different projects. One of the projects that our students engaged with was around mapping of slum community climate change adaptation and resilience in Dhaka city. And, you know, most of you are aware that Dhaka is one of the most vulnerable cities to climate change due to unplanned urbanization, increasing population density, increasing number of vehicles, reduction of foliage covered areas, inadequate open spaces and surrounding rivers. So the challenges are plenty. And the fall 2020 project focused on a couple of key questions. What are the likely impacts of climate change on informal settlements in Dhaka? What is the current water and sanitation situation in these settlements? Which groups are critical? Which individuals, groups, and organizations are critical to the governance of urban water and sanitation infrastructure systems? And what strategies and options would be useful in building climate resilient informal settlement in the city development process? And today we have with us for this little segment, 3 different individuals who can share some thinking on this. We have Mr. Mostafa Quaium, who's the advisor for the Bangladesh Urban Forum, who will share some thoughts on the city project itself. We also have Sardar Shafiqul Alam, who's a program coordinator for urban climate change at ICCCAD, who will also speak to that project. And then we have Sheela Patel, who's a founder of SPARC, who can comment after we finish on the Dhaka projects. I'll introduce the Mukuru project, and we can engage in a conversation on that. So let me invite Mostafa Quaium to share a few thoughts on the project within Bangladesh that the students have engaged with. Over you too, sir. You're muted,
you have to
sir.
Unmute. Quaium sahib, unmute korte hobe.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me, please? Hello, do you hear me? Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Murali. And thanks to other participants, particularly analysts, Dr. Saleemul Huq, Professor Rajesh Tandon, Sheela Patel. I think we know each other very well for a long time. And it's a very important topic for the whole world, but more particularly to the countries like Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, we have been, facing this climate change effects, I think I should say, for long. And if I say that the other way, that Bangladesh is a very well-known disaster-prone country. As a disaster-prone country, I think each and every citizen in the country, particularly in the rural context of Bangladesh, I should say, are very much concerned with this, and they grow up with this knowledge, as Professor Rajesh has mentioned, that community knowledge and the individual knowledge that to be resilient and to resist the disaster effects and the climate change effects. So this is, I should say, the part of Bangladesh people's life. And this is why I should say, I think in Bangladesh, there are, I should say, some from the government level, more from the non-government levels. And as you have mentioned about the universities and different other organizations, but I should say these are all sporadic. Most of these are very much sporadic, and then the beneficiaries of all these interventions, I should say, are not really that very much compared to the whole population of this country, particularly in the urban context. Working for last couple of decades, I should say, in the urban context, particularly with the urban poor, particularly mobilizing the urban poor, particularly for the benefits of the urban poor, I have seen that these people are vulnerable in many respects, including this climate change effects. And for themselves, they just only, I should say, manage mostly with their own knowledge, whatever they have from their, I should say, early life and wherever they have come from. Most of them, I should say, or many of them have come from the disaster affected areas of the country, mostly, I should say, which are under threat, particularly southern Bangladesh and western Bangladesh, I should say, many parts. And these interventions, I want to say that are not really very much sufficient. And in Bangladesh now, in Bangladesh population, more than 30% of the urban population are urban poor people. And due to this pandemic, still continuing, I should say this has increased. And this increase, the rate of increase, I should say, I think is going to be more, I should say, threatening to the urban context. And for this reason, I think there are some measures, but those measures are not really that much satisfactory. Like, for example, for under the leadership of Dr. Saleemul Huq from ICCCAD, for the last 4 years, except the last year, 2020, we have had 4 national conferences on urban resilience, and where we got involvement of all the government, non-government parties, international development partners, and many others from different universities, from different professional bodies who have come up with their knowledge, who have come up with their findings from different research and different surveys, and shared with all concerned. And that is how we have tried to make the people concerned, make the people who can really make some efforts, who can really make some interventions for the benefits of the urban poor people, and make them resilient. Actually, this was really making some changes, but I should say, since we haven't done that much of evaluation on this, but still I should say, as far as I have observed, there are some concerns being shown by the government sector and the non-government sectors. Mostly the universities who are doing some research, as far as I know. Like yesterday, we had a seminar in Hotel Intercontinental, where the seminar was on the strengthening the urban local government in Bangladesh. And this is the UNDP and FCDO funded project. And Municipal Association of Bangladesh is the partner with this project. The name of the project is LIUCP, Livelihoods Improvement of Urban Poor Communities Project. Previously, it was known as NUPRP. And our Prime Minister, who is showing very concern, who is of course proven concern, that is, she has given this name, Livelihoods Improvement of Urban Poor Communities Project. By saying this is a very big project funded by FCDO, and it has already passed about 2 years, and this has to go for another 3 years as per the current framework, and this is extendable. We are showing concern, and development partners from outside, from international context, are also showing concern for the resilience of the urban poor. And the Municipal Association of Bangladesh, it's a platform of 329 municipalities, secondary level, local governments, that in the urban context, the primary level, and in the country's context, it's the secondary level after the union, that is the rural level, and then the city corporations at the top level. So 329 municipalities are on this platform, and the project is this, the livelihood, the LIUPCP, and Municipal Association of Bangladesh, MAB, is working for raising awareness of the mayors officials in the respective municipalities to be active, more active on this matter, on this issue, and make the people of those respective municipalities give them knowledge, give them supports as far as possible, and also mobilize other sources for resources from the government, from the also other sources like local and the civil society, and also as far as possible from the other sources, and try to help the urban poor people. Because when there is any climate change effect, when most vulnerable people, the poor community, and they really get affected and they really don't get any support. And particularly in last year, I should say, we have seen that people, like in front of my house where I live in Uttara, every evening, every morning, they used to get together and they used to shout, give us food, give us medicines, give us masks, give us also other supports for our resilience. So this is what actually I have seen that this awareness, we don't have to get awareness, I should say, from the other sources very much. We can just, if we open our eyes, if we want to hear from the other, like the voices from the concerned, from the affected people, of course we can hear. Thing is intentions. Do we have intentions? I think in the non-government sector and in the development sector, though we are working, practically, I think we are trying our best to make the change, to bring the change. But I should say, from the national authority, I mean the government, there are of course measures, but thing is, it should be much more. It should be really more, I should say, to make it really, I should say, enough. I think adequate, but it's not really that much, I should say. I should say it's not that satisfactory, though there is a particular ministry for this, and also other ministries are concerned. They're also in the group for this national focus on this issue, but I don't think still it's enough or adequate. This Municipal Association of Bangladesh, so far, I think the project with the Municipal Association has started for last only 3-4 months. And I'm in fact leading this project now. And I'm also advisor or other way head of the Secretariat of the Bangladesh Urban Forum, where the government and non-government parties, organizations who are really working for development of the urban context, for particularly for planned urbanization and better and proper urban management. Unfortunately, I have got to say, actually, it's my confession, not really particularly from my personal confession, but from the organization point of view, organization stand, I should say, it's not really that much active because of different limitations. And the first limitation is this: the management of this Bangladesh Urban Forum is mostly with the government, particularly 2 ministries. One, the first ministry is the Ministry of Local Government, Rural Development and Cooperatives. Second ministry is Ministry of Housing and Public Works. And other ministries and the Prime Minister's office altogether are also in the steering committee. And fortunately, I'm the secretary of that committee. And I have tried so far, I've tried my best to mobilize the resource and support from different organizations, including this, UNDP, UN agencies, other agencies, DFID, USAID, many other international organizations. And I'm very happy to say that they really express their interest. They really express their, I should say, positive attitude to support, to come up with supports as necessary or as far as they can. But I should say our part, at the recipient end, our part, we don't or we can't really act for our organizational concerns, organizational limitations, systemic limitations, and all these things, grievances. Like the ministry is very much busy with many other priorities, but I mean the lead ministries, but we are not really having this as a priority from the ministries concerned. And like, at some time last year, I was, seeing, I was meeting the chairman of the committee, the minister, honorable minister of the local government ministry, and expressed my concern that this can be very much active, and particularly the disaster conditions or the disaster threats and the climate changes and all these things we can address and collectively, because this platform is to form the collective approach towards the issues for prevention, for adaptation, for resilience, and all these things together. And why not really we use this platform? He expressed his very much positive attitude, as if he was also mentioning that, look, I was coming from outside, he was coming from Manila, from Asian Development Bank conference, he was a participant there, and he was thinking, as he was saying, that he was thinking on return that why not we have a platform of the urban context of all the actors in the urban context, and they really work together collectively, address the urban issues, including the climate change effects and all these things. I said, sir, we have it. We have it, and it was formed in December 2011, and we have institutionalized. We have started the process for institutionalization from 2012, and the honorable president of the country he has inaugurated this Bangladesh Urban Forum to give it the top priority, for its opening and for its, I should say, objective and all these things. And the Prime Minister herself was very much supportive to this, but it's not really, I should say, active. Simply, I'm just holding the flagship. So please help me, or just get me rid of it. Help me to get rid of it. But I get, because I'm really frustrated. Then second thing, actually, I think in brief, I've tried, I should say, this Bangladesh Urban Forum. There are some urban forums in Vietnam. There are some urban forums in Pakistan. There is, and there are also other countries. As I have gathered my knowledge, they are very much active, and they are really proving their worth. They are really proving bringing changes. They are really helping to bring changes. But it's formed, but unfortunately, it's not really that much active. Even not, I should say, it's not at all active. Simply, that's all that's which I'm holding. And I have expressed that to the minister. Even yesterday, I had mentioned to him when I was a participant in this seminar. It was a long seminar. A British High Commissioner and many other dignitaries attended this, and I took this an opportunity. And I also mentioned that there are institutions, but if we can make them active, they can, I think, really render very good services as necessary to the context. Then Municipal Association of Bangladesh. This is also a very good platform. This was formed in 2000. And fortunately, I should say again, fortunately, I was one of the founding members, and even one of the members is now a minister. He is a cabinet minister and holding a very important portfolio. But actually, these type of institutions, these type of platforms are there, but nobody, I should say, give adequate attention to this to make it more active, to make it more institutionalized, to make it really, I should say, action-oriented. And that is why this Municipal Association of Bangladesh is also, to my view, I should say, not really adequately or not really active as it should be. There are 329 mayors on this platform and their officials on this platform. What a fantastic, what a very good, I should say, suitable platform. If this works, I should say, we can really bring changes as we really want to. And I'm trying my best, but thing is, I'm not yet really, I should say, out of frustration. Still, I'm trying my best, and I'll be able to do something. And so far, I have held some webinars like this, going on, and also there will be some more. There will be some more activities, and we have also tried to gather knowledge how they are facing this pandemic situation, how they face with other things, and how they are thinking about this urban resilience, and what are the measures being taken at different, municipalities, blah blah blah. So I think there are initiatives, there are interests, but I should say, in the end, now before I end, not really, to my view, adequate to the needs of the context. But urban people, particularly the urban poor people, they have their own individual knowledge, they have their personal knowledge, they have their community knowledge. By this, they manage. And I am working with these people for a long, long time. I should say it's more than 25 years. And I think I'm really happy that at least they can manage their own lives. They can really try to manage their own lives. But the thing is, they have also other threats. And that is why sometimes I should say they're really much more vulnerable. Like, here is a saying in Bangladesh that this time, during this pandemic, these poor people are proven that they have more immunity than the people, in the middle class, upper middle class, and the upper classes. And these people, most of them are not really following the health, care measures, and still, I should say, they are not really that much affected. And rate of, I should say, death, number of death with the urban poor settlements are not really that big, like, in the other sections of the society. And so you see, this is also, I should say, a natural sort of support. I should naturally supporting them. They are really, I should say, proving their more immunity. This is, I can, as Dr. Rajesh has mentioned, their individual knowledge, community knowledge. So they themselves, they manage. But thing is, we should try to, of course, support them. We should try to cooperate with them to follow this or to maintain this, to really take care of them by their own knowledge, by their own available resources, by their own capacity. But this should be spread. And there are knowledges with the different universities, different organizations working for these different professional bodies. And there are measures. But thing is, those measures are mostly in print and electronic medias. But these people, they really do not have that much of access to these, electronic medias or print medias and the publicity going on. That is why I think there are other, of course, ways to reach them, and only whenever there are some interventions, directly to the settlements, and there are only some beneficiaries, I should say, getting benefited, but not really as a whole, all of the urban poor communities everywhere in the country. So I think I can add, of course, much more, because I have knowledge about the 329 municipalities, 12 city corporations areas, and the urban poor people in the whole country. So this is the thing. In brief, I have tried to give up just, give to your knowledge, in the beginning. I can add more sometime ahead. Thank you, Mr. Professor Murali.
Thank you, Mr. Quaium Khan. Thank you so much for those thoughts. Alongside with what Rajesh and Saleem mentioned, what you have added to this, are several important learnings that our students have gathered while working on this project as well. And I'll summarize those learnings in a couple of ways. The first is the need for broad integration, and integration here is in different vectors. One is cross-disciplinary work, that the challenges of adaptation and solutions and implementation comes from multiple disciplines, and to think holistically was really exciting for the students. So we had students working from in the business school, with forestry and environmental studies, with public policy, with urban design. And when you bring all of these perspectives together, the insights are that much greater. So the first sort of integration is this cross-disciplinarity. The second is cross-institutional, and you've raised those different points, each of you, and Rajesh in particular notes that community organizations sit in a very different space, and I'll come back to that, especially in terms of how they are treated and how they figure so far in these networks. The third form of integration, which is where this knowledge network is important, is cross-continental or cross-community work, where there are different cities with urban forums, but they don't speak to one another. And so whatever knowledge is gained in one context doesn't somehow make it to another context. So communities are not alone. We need a way of knowledge curation that cuts across different contexts so that they can be learning as well. And so that becomes an important point around cross-disciplinarity, cross-institutional, and cross-continental as well. And so we can talk about that in the next piece of what you address. The second project, and I'll come back to you in a second, on this. The second project that student worked on, which I want to talk about very briefly and then invite Sheela to offer her thoughts, was a project in Mukuru in Nairobi. And as some of you are aware, the World Bank notes that African cities have now become the new home to more than 40,000 people every day, many who find themselves without a roof over their heads. And this is the soaring demand for housing is being met by insufficient new supply. And the housing market has few local developers with technical and financial strength to construct these large-scale projects, with individuals who live in these informal settlements paying a poverty penalty that is not insignificant. And this poverty penalty comes also in the way in which institutions like universities or funders or private sector engage with the communities and the informal settlements and community organizations. The asymmetry in that relationship is so vast that one of the learnings for me as a faculty member working with the students on these projects and for the students is even the language that's used to describe these communities that own these challenges and have come up with innovative ways so far of beginning to address and lead and manage change against very harsh conditions and resource shortages. And for me, the big learning was the idea that even the use of the word beneficiary strikes me as a cause of this asymmetry. And that the use of the word beneficiary should be replaced in my mind with the word partner. And they're just as important in this knowledge network because they are the only ones who can describe the research question and the problems well. And then that leads to subsequent collaborative work. But that role, for me, really stood out in this Mukuru project. And I'll invite Sheela to speak about that intersection, what she saw in how these projects were unfolding, and some of her reflections on these themes that have surfaced so far. Sheela, over to you.
Thank you. How much time do you give me?
You can take about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I've just put on my video. I'm Sheela Patel. I'm based in Mumbai. So greetings from a city that's facing huge challenges like all other major cities in the world of being the major COVID transmitter to the rest of the country. First of all, I want to say on behalf of the Kenyan partnership that has produced this amazing program called the Mukuru Special Development Plan. It's unfortunate that none of them are here, but I promise you on our collective behalf as Shack Dwellers International that the ongoing network that we propose that we will have will do a series of seminars to share the knowledge and information about it. So first of all, Mukuru is one of the several huge towns within the city of Nairobi, where almost 65 to 70% of people residing here live in informal settlements. And the work of Mukuru has gone on for the last 10 years at least, but it was since the formation of the new constitution of Kenya, where for the first time, there was a decentralization of governance in the country. And the governor of the Nairobi County invited the local alliance that is part of STI, which is the Akina Mashinani Trust, which is the NGO, SDI Kenya, and Muungano wa Wajiji, which is the Federation of the Urban Poor in several cities in Kenya, to come forward and design a plan for Mukuru, which got designation as a special planning area, SPA, and said, we give you 2 years to develop this plan. I have no idea whether anybody who's attending this seminar understands what an amazing tectonic shift this was, because all informal settlements today not only face the poverty penalty, but the biggest penalty is that the framing of any planning for these areas, when done by the conventional planning systems that universities teach students and which gets reproduced in municipalities and in metropolitan areas, completely negates the survival strategies that the urban poor have developed to survive in these informal settlements. And therefore, the densities, the roads, the water supply, the sanitation, the housing stock, who lives where, who owns the land, who owns the structures, who rents, sub-rents, Where are the markets? Everything goes against the grain of what is formal planning. And this amazing institutional arrangement in Nairobi of these alliances brought 40 organizations that were working with informal settlements in Mukuru in the form of 7 consortiums that dealt separately with health, education, infrastructure, housing, energy, and so on. The details will come later. But what I'm trying to say to you is that the community residence associations and this alliance put together data about the existing situation to produce alternative, probable ways of incrementally improving the quality of people's lives. And part of it was work that the local federations did with the residents association, with the structure owners, the landowners, the government, and a group from STI that supported the physical placement of all the data that people found out, which ultimately produced the Mukuru special planning area. And as a result of that process today, the entire road and water and sanitation infrastructure is presently being laid out. It is unimaginable for those of us who are involved in it that we have come to this level, and we have to come more. But what is more important is to understand that Mukuru represents what is going to happen in the future with informality and adaptation. And what, in relationship to the program that Dr. Murali managed and coordinated with the students, were 2 or 3 specific aspects of this. This is thin, small slices. One was to do with the fact that 100,000 households use wood fires. And the challenge was, how do you change that to using LPG gas, which would reduce the internal pollution that was impacting women and children's upper respiratory health, how to reduce the deforestation, because it was basically wood that was coming from the metropolitan region and was cutting down trees. And third was, how does it provide local organizations and entrepreneurs an opportunity to participate in the provision of businesses that link the larger supply of LPGs to the local groups that were there? And how do you produce a business plan? But what it basically did was that the providers of the knowledge, the providers of the data, the providers of the systemic challenges in Mukuru was done by community networks and their professional support groups to the students. It changes the partnership. It changes the way in which government looks at these partnerships. It produces intensely local processes of knowledge creation, but which have huge implications on the global discourse of what's going to happen with the 2.5 to 3 billion people who are living informally, for whom the planning systems of cities don't work. So we call this disruptive urban planning. And we are now championing a process by which we want to teach, train, sensitize our local authorities, our educational institutions, our financing institutions to say, how do you learn, partner, facilitate these processes? Because unless you do that, you are not going to produce any change. And that in each city, in each locality, there are many, many such towns within cities. 100,000 structures. This is a town in the northern part of the world. But they are just one of the 10, 15, 20 informal settlements in our in all our southern cities. So how do you take this process and how do you adapt it, adopt it, refine it, transform it, morph it to reach different things? What are the basic principles? Who's going to be part of the exchange of knowledge? Is it going to be abstracted by consultants so that it aberrates into something which doesn't work for the next group? How will we keep it honest and committed to what works for people? These are the challenges that we want to bring to this network when it comes in. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheela. Quaium, you have a thought to share?
Yes. Thank you, Professor Murali. Actually, which I wanted to say is that actually it's, now I took very good that I have heard Ms. Sheela Patel also, and she has talked about this Korean situation. And for her attention, I would like to draw that I have visited a model of urban settlement in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and that's named as Favela. And actually that was a UN sponsored visit to that is to Rio, Brazil. That was I think 5th or 6th World Urban Forum. We were taken to that urban settlement, and we have seen that model, fantastic model, how government can really mobilize all concerned and get these people really well settled. And all their rights can be preserved, all their rights can be met, and they can really have support for their living, and they can really have their livable conditions. And we actually from Bangladesh, there was in our team, it was a senior secretary from local government ministry, and also from UNDP and from 2 other organizations. We were really amazed. And I think we have learned, I should say, how collectively this can be addressed. You see, the government on what they didn't have to spend, I should say, that much. What government did is simply policy accommodation, policy initiatives. And that is how government has mobilized the contractors from the government, enlisted with the government system, contractors for construction of the housing settlements, roads, and all this blah, 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 through a proper planning. And the financiers, the banks come up, or the financial institutions come up with the supports without any interest, just through just a simple recollection process, and from their own earnings for, let's say, about making the arrangement for the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years as really possible. And government has also made a source of earning for their government revenue is that these people will pay, because they were paying, but they were paying to the, I should say, other elements of the society, which we call in different ways, the social powers. And government has just introduced a rental system, and that is simply for the utility services and for some other supports. It's very much negligible, and people were really, I should say, very happy, and they were, I should say, very well settled, secured. And that place was a den of the before, and that was really dangerous. And we were also told, we were briefed that don't go to that area because that's a dangerous area in the evening. And then later on, I have seen still the dangerous part and the secured part. So I should say there is an example in South America, that is Favela in Rio de Janeiro. Well, coming back to Bangladesh context, which I wanted to mention earlier, Professor Rajesh, you see, as I said, this community people, the urban poor people, they themselves manage their own living conditions. They really themselves try to manage, they try to resist the climate change effects and other disaster effects and all these things. And they also try to manage their livelihood, blah, blah, blah. But they are now aware that from the legitimate authority or from the national authority, they really won't get that much as they desire, as they deserve. So that is why they try to manage their own, and they want to.
We can't hear.
Yeah, I think the internet may have. Okay, so while we wait for him to come back, let me just pick up on one thought that Sheela, you mentioned, and then we can move into a broader conversation and bring in some other voices as well. The story of in Mukuru of Muungano and the Akiba Mashinani Trust highlights in my in my learning and from the students' learning as well, that the lack of citizen participation in planning, implementing, and monitoring of services, and generally allowing the voice of the poor to surface, that those organizations are so crucial in bringing those voices to the forefront. And without those voices, without that information, any strategy that the city or any researcher suggests is going to be met with suboptimal success. And so that role that those organizations play in organizing communities is so crucial. And as part of how universities learn how to do research in communities, that really is quite an important learning so far for us.
But you know, the problem in this has been that everybody lauds this when they hear it. But like Rajesh said, it quickly gets institutionalized and mechanized in a way into a research formulation that pushes people back into becoming subjects of that study. And therefore, one of the things I want to recommend, which I want to remind right now, we don't know how much time we have, a very important element of what we do in this network is to do something that is parallel to what through the GCA, the local adaptation track has done as principles for financing local adaptation. Is to say, we've made a bunch of principles for that. I think if we want seriously to develop this new knowledge partnership, we need to do similar principles, because we see so much asymmetry in power, in legitimacy, in what constitutes keeping things in the public domain, learning, all these things in this thing. So maybe Rajesh, you, Dr. Saleem, all of us, and we as STI, we should end this with a commitment that we will do similar principles for knowledge production, sharing, and ownership. Because at STI, we truly believe that knowledge that comes from below is powerful. It is the only way, when we do it aggregationally, that we get voices, we get agency, and we want to protect that, but we want partnerships that will acknowledge that, will respect that, and will change this highly inequitable system, including the financing of research. You know, today, a lot of globally North-based bilateral, multilateral, and philanthropic institutions are financing research, supposedly for the poor, but has no ethical systems that hold everybody accountable for making these partnerships really equal. In SDI, we've started to say, we will decide which are partnerships and where we are subcontractors, because that's what we are being pushed by this process to be. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sheela. On that note, I think, why don't we move into the next phase of our conversation, and let me invite Smita from the Urban Resilience Lead from the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities to bring those questions to the surface. And what are some models of participatory research that we can learn from? What are some principles that we can start thinking about? What role might universities have? How are these institutions engaging with youth networks? How are city networks involved in something like this? And how can research institutes like WRI also be part of these conversations to create this link between global, national, and local adaptation work? So let me invite Smita to take over the moderation and pick up these conversations and take us through to the end. Smita.
Thank you, Dr. Murali. This has been such a rich conversation. I really appreciate it. It's a great panel of speakers whom we have assembled here. I would really maybe for the next session, there's a lot that has already come up. And maybe I would like to delve deeper into that by asking you all certain follow-up questions as we think about what these principles for this partnership could look like, so that we are truly creating a co-equal partnership for knowledge generation. So I think maybe the first question, and all of you could take maybe about 5 minutes or so to respond to the question. So maybe the first question is to Dr. Tandon. And I know you have spoken about the local hubs that have been developed under UNESCO and PRIA program. And you mentioned that, and you've previously, I know, spoken about the relevance of local knowledge and the need for these kind of localized partnerships versus global knowledge. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about, you know, the course that we have, or the course that Dr. Murali was mentioning of joint research that we have initiated in this first step of the partnership has been about a network of global students coming together to support research while working with local communities or city governments or research institutes on local projects. That model still has the challenges of somewhat putting students under the pressure of being these kind of fly in, fly out researchers, just like the same term we use for fly in, fly out consultants. And you know, that has its limitations. It has its challenges in terms of how much students can quickly learn about the local context and be really responsive to the questions that are posed in these projects to them, to research. And I wonder whether you could talk about how important is for this initiative to consider more localized partnerships with local universities committed to a particular context for longer term impact and more impactful research and engagement of universities in communities. Over to you, Dr. Tandon. You might be muted, Dr. Tandon. Can you hear us, Dr. Tandon? Well, maybe while we give him time to unmute himself, maybe I'll come back to him for a response. Maybe I can move on to ask a similar but maybe slightly different question to Dr. Saleem on a similar issue about how can universities create longer term partnerships with communities in cities to be able to support long-term change in some of these missing linkages that we have between formal structures of knowledge and the informal structures of knowledge. And what is the role universities can play in that, but also some of the challenges, as Sheela pointed out, the moment these systems of knowledge get formalized, they tend to be transported out to be used in abstract and deployed in locations where they might not be relevant. And that's a challenge that we need to be aware of. So maybe Dr. Saleem, if you could reflect on, based on your experience and work that ICCCAD has done, how could one avoid such pitfalls in this partnership between universities and communities and formalization of local knowledge or informal knowledge systems?
Sorry, Smita, I think Dr. Saleem is not in the session right now, but I see Rajesh is here. So maybe we'll pick up on the question that you asked of him.
My apologies, I had to pick up a call, so I didn't want the noise to come here.
Not at all, go ahead.
Tell Smita what question was there. Sorry, I missed the question.
The question was mainly about as this alliance tries to develop principles for a new architecture for knowledge in the future, how how focus should we be on creating local hubs or local partnerships between communities and universities which are locally based to create a longer term impact? Because one of the challenges, or at least our current initial first step, is where we are working with global universities and bringing them to communities, working on very localized issues. And that has its own challenges and limitations in terms of what we can achieve. So if you could talk a little, based on your experience, on how this alliance should focus on creating more localized partnerships, that would be great.
Thank you. As I said, apologies. Let me give you two examples. One from India, one from South Africa. No, three, in fact, Indonesia also. In Indonesia, for the last 10 years or so, there is a policy that higher education institutions must act in partnership with communities in a socially responsible manner. And there is a scheme they call KKN, and this scheme implies that all undergraduate students must spend at least 6 weeks in a community. In Indonesia, I have been trying to persuade our partners in Surabaya, who are part of our Knowledge for Change hub, to focus on urban communities also, because the tendency has been to go to village. Well, it is true, villages need more inputs, they need more support and all that. And there is a certain degree of exoticness in going to a village. Let me be honest, right? If you are an urban student, you say, well, I'm going for field placement. Why should I go to the slum where I have to walk through the mush and the piss and all this? I'd rather go to a village, pristine, green village, and do my internship. Second example is South Africa. South Africa has been supporting a research scheme from the South African Higher Education Council, which incentivizes students and faculty working in partnership with community, and the community's acknowledgement and formal MOU is prerequisite to apply for that research funding scheme. We have partners in Durban, and we have partners in Rhodes University. Now again, the partners in Durban and Rhodes University are working with urban communities in using this scheme to provide practical research support in partnership with local communities. The one in Durban has focused on sanitation in the Durban greater Durban area. The one in where the Rhodes University is, Elizabeth, what's the city? I'm forgetting the name of the city, smaller town.
Port Elizabeth.
Port Elizabeth.
Yeah, Port Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Sheela. They have partnered with city public schools, and they are supporting changes in the curriculum of public schools so that students learn about climate issues from school curriculum onwards. And they have other components of it. The third example is from India. I've been serving on a University Grants Commission Expert Committee, which last year formulated a policy called Fostering Social Responsibility and Community Engagement in Higher Education. The policy was launched in January 2020, but it is now going to be implemented this year because of the shutdown last year. And just last week, we had a meeting of the committee where we are encouraging about 90 colleges or universities whose select faculty members will be trained to take their students to communities to learn with the communities and for communities. Why this example is relevant today, and Sheela perhaps knew about it, but last week we have decided that, and the pandemic helped that original scheme was again exotic rural community. Now it's not rural, it's poor communities, including urban, very explicitly, because the crisis of the migrant labor in India, millions of them walking on their feet, suddenly told people that urban poverty exists under our bellies in metros. So now, frankly, urban is more difficult for universities because they are in urban centers. There are very few universities which are based in rural hinterland. Because they are in urban centers, they are subject to the power structures in the politics of urban locations. Their students as well as their faculty. I am pushing for public universities in India, not the fancy private universities. I have nothing against them, but I think the students of the public universities are the ones who need the support to learn from and engage and contribute to. And one of the components, their training is going to start in February, March, and I've been talking to Sheela briefly. One of the components we are going to introduce in that training is urban resilience, focus on what you can learn from urban resilience. And hopefully, if this moves forward, then several hundred and thousand students would be doing something in this. Of course, it will require systematization. So, Smita, I am the great believer in working where I stand first. And if I don't work where I stand first, I can leap out to others, but leaping out globally should be on the basis of my work locally. Otherwise, we reproduce, pardon my saying so, but we reproduce colonial systems of exploitation of knowledge and its attendant best wishes. I have been fighting universities in UK and in Holland for last 10 years because they always come to us with a global scheme. And I ask them, if you are in Newcastle or if you are in Cambridge, what work are you doing locally? Don't tell me urban poverty doesn't exist locally.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are doing some work locally and I'm doing some work locally, then we have a way of bridging. Otherwise, you forget your own realities and then you try to connect with my reality through concepts. If you act on your reality, you have an experiential basis of working. And I am in favor of global solidarity and global networking. But if it is not rooted in local work by all partners of the network, then the North Americans and the Europeans capture the network. It has happened in the case of civil society. I am a founder of Civicus in 1993, and I am founder of FIM and many global networks. And I know that unless you pay attention to this, you will end up reproducing the former systems.
Now, thank you for those remarks. Greatly appreciate, and I think great direction for this alliance as we think about the principles for new knowledge development. And Sheela, and I think, thank you for giving that charge. I think it really does, make sense for us to focus on collectively identifying those principles in order to make a solid way forward, and avoid some of the pitfalls that others have experienced through their learning. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of pitfalls of our own to learn from nevertheless. Sheela, maybe I would like you to respond to something that you raised. I mean, if the challenge that you identified is that if we bring in the formal structures of knowledge to help support some of the, or help work with some of the community-based organizations and social movements, unless the sensitivities of how that knowledge should really be understood in all its complexity of the socio-political and economic conditions of that communities, of a particular community, unless those are clearly understood, the challenge of abstraction and that knowledge being, kind of documented in the formal structures in a manner that it gets misused is there and remains. And what would be some of your thoughts to avoid that and ensure that those kind of misrepresentations of the local knowledge do not happen?
First of all, this has been fascinating, and we have to make sure that we continue these conversations because this is very exciting. So the first thing I feel is that one of the reasons why social movements are important in this conversation is precisely for this reason, because it fulfills this very specific and special thing that Rajesh talked about, which is, that the new normal should have many different locals that produce the global, not the other way around. That the global produces the cookie cutter that has to be fulfilled by local. And so one of the things that we are ensuring as STI, we work in over 350 cities in 33 countries. Our focus is, first of all, to create a long-term relationship between the local university institutions and the local communities, and to bring in the local government on the basis of demonstrating that the knowledge that poor people produce, that gets legitimated by the university systems, both in interpretation, in the efficacy, and also giving responsibility to the local university system to bring in technology, policy, knowledge into this, because we don't believe in this, in this romance that only what poor people produce is good knowledge. Ultimately, the partnership has to weigh what is impactful, useful, strategic, doable, representationally possible, and that partnerships can do. So the idea is to produce local knowledge that goes into so one of the things which Saleem, me and Dr. Musa, and now Lauren Lagarde, who's also a commissioner, has committed is we do a 10-year partnership. Don't talk about little projects, cute little investigations. Talk about a long-term project that is embedded in a decadal relationship, because we know that urban change doesn't happen. You have to navigate through people's realities, local policy, legal frameworks, finance, politics, all these things. It's complex, but the complexity can be broken down locally because of local things. But we also know that social movements that are global are important, because this local insight then has to morph into what's happening in the form of national frameworks or global frameworks. And we have to create collective capacity to articulate this. 40 years ago, if you had asked me, I wouldn't have participated in this conversation, because I wouldn't know how to represent what I'm doing locally in a global discourse. So one of the things that we are doing as STI is we're actually trying to build these local partnerships and the local leadership's capacity to make a representation at a global level. So now you have at least 10 or 15 people in Mukuru who can talk about these things to Dr. Murali's students, for instance. But what we are also hoping is that if there is a partnership with the local universities, and therefore it answers your second question, which is that if there's a local partnership which is solid between a community and a university, that partnership can then go global and use global knowledge, global advocacy. And let's not diminish the value of doing a North-South process. Because I know that every person who came and worked with us in STI or in India, physically working with us for 1 year or 1 semester, when they have gone to work in international organizations, they have taken the values and the comfort and the efficacy of local knowledge there, and they come back to us and say, we need to do this. What do you think you should do? So those are also long-term relationships that this comes out. But we do have to develop a new architecture. And the other last point I want to make is there are many budding negotiations to build these things. Between ICCCAD and SDI, for instance, I was at the last Gobeshona conference, and I made a commitment to ICCCAD that SDI and wherever ICCCAD works and wherever the Luck network is there, we will work together to support a local partnership between the university and the community. And Saleem has probably had to go to another event because he's anchoring all this. But I can say on our behalf that that's part of our agenda. And a lot of the stuff which, for instance, we're doing in the bridge financing projects or in all the other things that the GCA is involved is going to draw on these local partnerships. We do the same with Rajesh, for instance. We do the same with Dr. Murali's Cure Network. Is to say, and now I'm bringing other networks that I know of in India or in other cities to be part of this network that we hope will come out of this conversation. Many of them got this information too late, but we can agree at the end of our discussion to say a few of us will anchor the registration of these different networks that come into adaptation, resilience, disaster management, urban development into this process. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sheela. Thank you for your remarks. One question.
Can I just a quick one?
Sorry, go ahead.
What Sheela
Sure.
You know, one of the greatest difficulties we are facing in this Knowledge for Change Global Consortium is that the support in terms of policy as well as research money is not similar around the world. Different countries have different levels of policy support for this partnership. And of course, many countries in the global south don't have resources for this kind of a partnership. So given the current reality of inequality of research funding and research collaborative resources, it is important to keep in mind that when we work in a network, we incentivize the work in local hubs. And so with our limited resources, for example, if training requires local mentors to do some field research, we try to find some resources which can support them to do field research in partnership with local community, because they cannot access their universities or their funding bodies, which have very few resources. So this is number one. Number two is that language, which I mentioned in the beginning, is a very important problem. And if we are not sensitive to language, the way language is used in research, in documenting the knowledge, then, very soon it leads to abstraction and therefore loses its meaning. And it has not been very easy to work in diverse language communities, because communities work in their own mother tongue and they don't work in any other language. So how do we do that? I think some sort of ethical protocols on these things should be foundational. And the last point I want to make is that networks which are successful because of relationships of trust. And very quick or premature formal structuring of networks can come in the way of building trust. And trust,
Death knell.
Trust is built by working together. Trust is not built by saying, oh, I love you or I trust you. No. Let's work together. We find ourselves having similar values and respecting each other, then we trust each other. And once this trust is there, formalization is not a problem. But many a times, premature formalization of global networks comes in the way. Thank you.
Wise words there, Dr. Tandon, from both your experience building a number of hubs, local hubs in various locations. So thank you for that advice. Maybe I would like to next call on Dr. Murali to maybe reflect on how, a lot of universities, we were just talking about how do these joint research initiatives and the new knowledge architecture, how does it get funded? And one of, of course, the channels of funding are some universities are very well endowed, have a lot of research funding that available or can help access. And that could be a huge benefit to even local communities to be able to submit joint research proposals, which are multi-year research proposals working with particular communities in particular locations for a longer term goal. As a way to, enable funding for impact. But how could you maybe reflect on, where do you see challenges in accessing funding for some of these new architectures of joint research that we are talking about?
Thank you for that question, Smita, and I really appreciate the sentiments that Rajesh just articulated, that it's important to recognize that local and global need to be considered together, and in the absence of having local community engagement, you're going to replicate old models of colonial engagement as well. And you know, I tell my students, you don't have to go to India or Africa or any other country or continent to see what poverty looks like. You can go from the University of British Columbia, travel 20 minutes, and you'll see the poorest zip code in Canada, where poverty exists in all its forms. And so that deep local community engagement is really important before you start thinking about global engagement. But to your question around funding of research, before you think about funding, you need to think about what the incentive mechanisms are for research programs that are long-term oriented. None of these challenges are going to be addressed by a research project that lasts for 6 months or a year, but yet universities, especially in North America and in Europe, and indeed in the quote developed countries, their models of tenure, promotion, etc., reward very narrow slices of research that can be completed quickly within a tenure period of about 4 to 5 years. And you need multiple research publications before you can get tenured. So the whole process of rewards in universities lead to very narrow slices of research, very, very focused fundamental research with little thought to application. And the incentive mechanism is to quickly get tenured. And then universities wonder why our research does not translate to public policy. That's because we haven't engaged with public policy officials or community organizations in even understanding what the research questions are from a use-inspired perspective. And that research takes a very long time. And you cannot tell an young assistant professor who's just finished his or her PhD after 4 or 5 years, you're going to do a research project for 15 years, and maybe you'll get a publication out of it, but you're not going to get tenured at the university. So the perverse incentive mechanisms prevent research even from going there. As a result of which, most research funding goes to what would be better described as fundamental research rather than responsive research, because responsive research, meaning from the use-inspired or community perspective, takes longer, requires the participation of multiple people, multiple stakeholders, and most PhD programs don't train researchers to even know how to converse with community organizations. And that, not just the language point that Rajesh mentioned, which is not just whether you speak in Hindi or Tamil or Bengali versus English, but it's even the way in which you describe problems and the language systems that are used to talk about problems. Most university research professors would not know how to sit down and ask a community partner, tell me what your key challenges are and how can we design research to address those key needs. So the entire system is geared towards more fundamental research, quicker research, more very narrowly focused research as opposed to holistic challenges that require transdisciplinarity. But now that shift is happening in universities where we recognize that transdisciplinarity is an important element, that community engaged learning is an important element, that without those elements and without principles of equitable, respectful engagement of community organizations, we are going to continue to perpetuate colonial mechanisms of knowledge transfer, knowledge creation, and even the use of the word knowledge transfer, universities are beginning to ask the question, doesn't that imply that universities somehow will produce knowledge and transfer it out of universities? That's not a co-creation model, that's a one-directional model. And so this all is going to call for a lot of culture change within universities to recognize that we need to operate more on the basis of humility as opposed to hubris that typically fills the researcher's mind when they go in to do research. So anyway, multiple thoughts there, but I hope I addressed some of your question.
No, thank you for that, Dr. Murali. And, you know, and I maybe with just 10 minutes left or 12 minutes left, I did want to pick on some of the audience questions in the chat. And this also goes back to something Mostafa mentioned early on, a little bit of an elephant in the room, which we haven't talked too much about, is how can we ensure that there is commitment from local governments to take action based on the research that comes out of these partnerships? How can we find those local governments or even national government instituted policies that are progressive? And should we be clear-eyed that we should work in those communities where there are aligned progressive strategies with local governments? And I know that, you know, Dr. Tandon mentioned this early on, that some partnerships with local governments have also been initiated now in the longer run through the PRIA network. So maybe if he could reflect on how critical it is to continue to think about that alignment with government in order to be able to create impact, avoid barriers, and support this work.
Smita, if I could just, before Rajesh, I just want to share one little thought. And that goes to the question that, in response to what you're saying, the question and comment really that Saleem de Cruz has posted on the Q&A. You know, we've worked closely with the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, on a project on urban horticulture for the city of Chennai. And the way in which the partnership with the city of Chennai, IIT Madras, and us was orchestrated for this project was really through both UBC and city of Chennai working with the 100 Resilient Cities network. It wasn't that they were going to look for a local organization. And this goes to what we discovered was that there is a lot of competition for the same resources within that geography and areas of influence as well that Saleem talks about. And that last sentence, in fact, was more telling, where she says it's often easier to have a relationship far off than closer to home. And we've discovered that in very concrete ways, where UBC has signed very strategic partnerships, for instance, with the Ministry of Environment, Forestry, and Climate Change in India. And then UBC seeks out local universities to partner. But as you ask the question, why couldn't the Ministry of Environment, Forestry, and Climate Change reach out to a local institution? But I suspect what gets to this is what Saleem is talking about. And I wonder if she can also be invited to comment on this. But I'll just say that and turn it over to Rajesh. Sorry,
and
Rajesh.
Rajesh and Saleem, please both feel free to respond.
In the urban space, the change happens in a very complex way. Change happens when there is global networking, as Murali gave example. Change also happens when there is local pressure. And local communities, local students, local residents and citizens, when they see the value of something, then the change happens. Now, if you look at the air pollution problem of Delhi and the foaming water in the city of Bangalore, both of which are technologically, financially, politically important urban centers in India, no change has happened over the last 10 years or unlikely to happen. Why? Because it is not the evidence which brings change. No, it's not the evidence which brings change. What we need is a combination of knowledge, organization, and changing relations of power. At the city level where we were, why did local governments pay attention to local knowledge? Because there was pressure on them to build toilets and include everybody. Our research showed that they had forgotten 50% of the urban poor because their database didn't include them. As soon as we produce this knowledge with the local citizens, all of the municipal officers started visiting those slums and shaking hands and garlanding them and said, sure, we will work with you. Because their performance incentive could only be fulfilled if they included this local knowledge. And local communities' knowledge suggested where you should have individual household toilets, where you should have community toilets, what kind of garbage collection mechanism will work in these informal settlements where poor communities live, and what kind of water arrangement needs to be made. Now, the municipality has not addressed all their problems, but a relationship between the municipality and the local community has been built through, you can say, this kind of brokering or this kind of enabling effect. Sustainability of change anywhere, in your family, in my community, in my country, sustainability of change will only happen when local actors in that system own the change process. It does not happen if local politicians, if local municipal commissioners, if local academics alone believe in that solution. We are witnessing a wonderful story right now. Yesterday, only 50% of health workers showed up for the vaccine in India. Health workers. Why? They said we want to wait and watch because we are doubtful about the efficacy of the vaccine being used. You can try anything you like. You can bombard them with television stories, with posters, with shouting matches from the top of the pyramid. And under coercion, I may seem to do it, but when coercion disappears, I will do what I believe in, and you will do what you believe in. And the process of doing joint research should help this convergence of belief to happen. Only then change will be sustainable.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon. That's really, I mean, yes, for long-term change, as you're suggesting, that those local partnerships are so critical. I think we have 4 minutes left. With 4 minutes left, maybe what I would like to propose is, this alliance and this partnership with CURE, WRI, LUC, ICCCAD, and SDI was proposed in the context and was initiated in the context of the Global Commission on Adaptation's charge to partners like WRI and others to come together to create key strategies to advance inclusive adaptation. And Sheela is a commissioner at the Global Commission on Adaptation. So maybe I would like to invite Sheela to now give some kind of reflections based on this conversation to how we continue to build on this work that we have initiated through the Global Commission's charge and take it forward to other narratives that we and to the global platform coming up in COP26 to further build on what we have developed and enrich it with others' experiences as well. Sheela?
Thank you, Smita. And first of all, for both as a representative of the Commission, which by the way will see its sunset next week, and I hope some of you attend that event, but also on behalf of the challenges of bringing climate change perspective to city development. I think very, very different sets of partnerships need to be in place to make this happen, which are local, global, continental, regional. I mean, the complexity would be huge, but there is a deep simplicity to very critical choices that have to be taken today if things have to be different when we look at this in 2030. So, so several things come up to us. One, we are still a very small majority, a small minority of people who believe that cities can only be sustainable if they look at climate, social equity, and justice together, and that transformation is not going to come from above. It has to be a transformation that comes and joins the people from different levels. So this whole top-down hierarchical business has to change. The second thing is we have to invite mayors and city authorities to this party and do some serious tough negotiations, because like our speaker from Bangladesh said, it's very easy to have, to create an association, a network, a platform, but very difficult to give it teeth and to give it systems and ask for its accountability. So how will we globally and locally demand this from each other? So that's the second. And the third one is, at a very simple but seminal level, what are the principles that we want to hold all of us accountable to in the production and use of knowledge? And how are we going to change the very simple but powerful architecture that produces these new partnerships? Because COVID and climate have in many ways shown us that there are lots of things that we haven't planned for or we can't plan for. But good quality knowledge, partnerships, relationships of trust, equitable right to explore possibilities are what has helped those who have had these relationships on the ground in this year of COVID, versus those which are authoritarian and pushing everything down. So I really look forward to us, Smita, doing this. And I think that those of us who are championing the local action track and its 10-year journey, on behalf of them, I make a very serious commitment to pursue this and to develop a co-accountability. You know, we should all work with helping create local partnerships. And I think that's the connection between the local and the global in facilitating this. So I'll stop there, and let's ask everybody who's attended this event to give us their IDs. You collect them, and by the end of January, at least some of us will put together a possible, not heavily bureaucratized networking system by which we begin to at least share what we are doing together. So thank you, Smita.
Thank you, Sheela. And yes, as Sheela echoed, I would request the organizers to kindly share the participants' IDs with us. I see from the chat that we have a lot of like-minded people from universities and other both local, international groups who joined to listen into this conversation. And we would certainly both like their inputs and partnership as we develop this work further. So please do stay in touch. And for the panelists, I want to thank you all for this rich conversation. You know, this was certainly an opportunity for us to be able to step back a little bit, think more broadly about what shape and form the work that we have collectively developed thus far should take in the future. So we really appreciate all your valuable comments, inputs, suggestions to us, and we look forward to you as well joining our alliance and so working with us and enlarging and deepening the scope of the work that we want to do. Thank you all. Really appreciate your participation here. I know we are out of time. So just wishing everyone well from wherever you are calling in. And good evening, good afternoon, good night, and good morning to some. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you
for the wonderful session.